So the recording has actually started, we're actually live, so everything I'll be saying, everything that's coming up on the conversation chat room will be recorded, and what we can do is provide a live link for that at a later date if you need to go back in or check anything. Okay, I'll also put up my contact details at the end of the presentation, so if you'd like me to contact you personally, I can come back and give you some help. Okay, so as I said before, we'd be doing a sort of 20 minutes demonstration, and then after that will be time to maybe go back and have a look at some of the questions. In terms of the aims of this session, I've got kind of three main aims, or these are two really. So we're going to look at the settings of how to set up a Moodle assignment, and within those settings we'll look at the Turnitin settings and make sure those are all correct and what they actually mean. And then as I talk through these, we will actually raise what I see as some of the common issues. But what we're trying to do at the end of it is to make you feel more confident in terms of you being able to go in, set up your assignment and feel that it's going to work smoothly. Okay, so what I'll do now is that I'm going to share my screen. So I'm going to go in and share a page of Moodle. This will probably take just a couple of seconds to load. So the screen might initially go blank for a few seconds, but it should load after a couple of seconds. If you're on a phone or a tablet, it might ask you to accept sharing the screen. Okay, and hopefully now you can actually see the picture of a Moodle page in front of you. So this is a very typical Moodle module. We've got the weeks scrolling down, weeks 1, week 2, all the way down to weeks 11. We've got the announcements at the top of the page. Before I even go in to look at the settings, I think the first thing, I know it sounds obvious, but actually it's to make sure that it's absolutely clear to your students where you've put the assignment submission area. So I've created a section right at the top called assessment, and I'm going to put the assignment into this section here. So you can see there's already a couple of assignments already in there. What I want to do now is create a new assignment for the students to submit, and we'll look at the settings together. All right, so first of all, what I need to do is go to the top right hand side of the screen and click on Turn Editing On. Okay, and you can see now we've got all the buttons in terms of being able to switch on various things within the page. To set a new assignment, we need to go to Add an Activity or Resource. So first of all, click on that link. We get a little pop-up appear on the screen, and assignment is obviously the top one in terms of activities at the top of the pop-up. So click on there and then click the blue button at the bottom for Add. Okay, in terms of the page, the first thing that asks you to do is to give your assignment a title. So I'm just going to call this workshop assignment, and below that you can write a description of what the assignment's about. So you don't have to do this, but it's up to you what you want to put in here. So I'm just going to type in something quickly there. Obviously, if you are going to put something a bit more detailed in there, if you want the students again to see the description, click the little box below. However, typically, I suspect most lecturers will actually have an assignment brief. Now, you might have already uploaded this to Moodle, but it's obviously quite a good idea to make sure that assignment brief is next to the actual assignment submission area, or actually you have the alternative to actually put the assignment brief into as an attachment to this area here. So you can do that by dragging and dropping it into this space here, or if you click on the little add button here, it gives you the option to choose wherever you've stored it, add the file and upload it into that space there. Okay, those are relatively straightforward. What does cause some confusion are the settings, and I suppose in one sense there are a lot of settings here, and that's why it does cause some issues. I've got to say that I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible, but basically if you remember that really all you need to do is concentrate really on just 2 or 3 things, and for 90% of assignments you do not need to change the default settings. So I'm going to look at first of all these availability dates, make sure that everybody's very clear in terms of what those mean. Secondly, I would look at what this means in terms of the submission settings. And then finally to look at the Turnitin plagiarism plugin settings. If you've got some questions about some of those other things, we can come back to, but I just want to look at these 3 main areas as I consider them to be the most important. Right, first of all, in terms of dates, there are 3 dates. The key date, the most important date, is the due date. So at the moment for this assignment it's set at the 21st of March 2018. Now that is the due date, is the hand-in date, when the students actually have to hand in their piece of work. Anything that's handed in after the due date will be a late submission. So make sure that this date is correct. To change it, we just need to click on the calendar here. So if, say for example, I wanted to change the due date from the 21st to the 23rd, I'd click on here and it shows straight away. The default timing is set for 00 hours, which means basically 12 o'clock at night. Now I would recommend that you actually change this to more office hours. So I'm actually going to change this to 12 o'clock midday. The reason being is that if you leave it at 12 o'clock in the evening and a student has any particular issues, they won't be able to get any help. If you set it for office hours, the student can maybe contact the IT help desk. They can actually speak to somebody maybe on campus who can actually give them a bit of help. So that's the first tip I would give, is basically make sure you change this date time to office hours. Monday to Friday is probably the best time. Right, the 2 other dates that are important, and the first one is the allow submissions from. Now to enable it, you just tick on the button that says enable. So this you can set to whatever date you want to, just by clicking on the calendar and changing it here. If you leave it unticked, it's going to be available from the moment that you click at the bottom, save and return to course. So actually you don't have to actually set a allow submissions date. That's only really if you don't want the students to see it straight away. So I'm just going to leave that as it is for the moment. Again, it sounds obvious, but make sure that if you do set a date here, make sure the allow submissions date is before the due date. Okay. Finally, we have a cutoff date. So again, if we enable this, and we do so by clicking here, the cutoff date has to be after the due date, so we'd have to change that to after the 23rd of March. But after that date, the submission areas link is going to disappear off Moodle, and the students will not be able to submit their work. It has to be at least 2 weeks after the due date for DDS students who have the extra time to submit their work. But again, if you don't tick that, the link will remain permanent and students can submit their work anytime after the due date. Okay, hopefully that's clear about those 3 dates. The second area that I want to look at is the submission settings. So this is the settings that I've expanded just below. There are 2 questions here, and both the default settings for both of them are set as yes. So the first one says require students to click submit button, and this is as clicked as yes. And again, I would strongly recommend that you do not change this. Keep it at the same as yes. What this actually means is that there is a 2-stage process for the students to actually submit their work. The first stage is that they submit their work as a draft copy, and then the second stage is that they submit their work as a final piece of work to be marked. It's important, especially for using Turnitin, because we want to allow the students to submit their work as a draft copy, make changes to it, re-upload it up until the due date. So definitely keep this on as yes if you're using Turnitin. The second one requires the student to accept a notice saying that the work is their own piece of work. After I've finished looking at these settings, what I'll do is I'll come out as a lecturer and log back in as a student, and then you can see what it looks like from a student's eye perspective, and this will probably make a little bit more sense. Okay, moving on. The next group of settings is really to do with the Turnitin plagiarism tool. So again, I suspect most lecturers have heard of Turnitin and realise that it's a plagiarism detection tool. So what it does is when the student submits a piece of work, Turnitin will search anything on the internet, will search any newspapers, any articles, see if anything's been copied and pasted into that student's piece of work. It will flag that up in what's called a similarity index or originality report. It will also check students' work that's been submitted. So if there are 2 students who have submitted the same piece of work, it will flag that up. Quite often what students don't realise is that because most universities in Britain use Turnitin, if a student's piece of work, say one of their friends or relatives, submitted a work to another university, a similar piece of work, it's going to flag that up as well as being copied from another student submission to another university. Okay. All right, that's what it is. That's what it actually does. It has some really useful feedback tools in there as well. We're not really going to look at feedback today. That will probably be the next webinar that we will be doing. Right, to enable Turnitin, it seems fairly obvious, but where it says enable Turnitin, we click that from no to yes. And straight away you can see it's now made all these other settings live, and you could change them if you want to. Again, I have to say, for 95% of all student submissions, you just need to keep the default settings the same. Do not change them. Okay, I'll very briefly go through some of these settings. There might be occasions where it is necessary. So the first one says display originality reports to students. Yes. That's the default setting. That's what the students want to see. They want to see that they can actually, if there are any matches on the piece of work that they've submitted. The next thing will indicate that their piece of work will be uploaded to the Turnitin database. You do not want to allow submissions of any other file types. Turnitin will accept Word, it will accept PDF, it will accept most file types. If you switch that to yes, then you will maybe allow students to upload some of their work in some obscure software which you're going to find almost impossible to download. The work will go into the Turnitin standard repository. There might be occasion where you want to switch that off. Maybe students are doing some formative assessment and you don't want their work to go onto the Turnitin database. The next bit is, again, I would definitely recommend that you keep all these default options switched on. So check against stored student papers, check against the internet, check against journals and periodicals. And then where it says generate reports immediately, resubmissions can be allowed up to due date. So what this means is that students can submit their work, they can look at the originality reports, they can make changes to their original piece of work, and then resubmit their work right up until the due date. They can do this as many times as they want. I suppose the only thing that they have to be aware of is that it takes 24 hours for a new originality report to be generated. So there is a slight time delay on that. Okay, and then the last thing is if you want anything to be excluded, but again, I would recommend you keep these default options. So the bibliography is excluded, but you can exclude small matches in terms of a word count or percentages from the originality report. Turnitin can also do rubrics as well, but again, it's really outside the scope of this webinar today, but we may come back to that at a later date. All right, so those are all the settings that I'm going to look at. I know this is slightly repetitive, but in summary, if I was to summarize what I've just said, is make sure the due date is correct. Make sure the default options for the submission settings, yes, are kept the same. And if you want to enable the Turnitin, click the Turnitin enable button from no to yes. Is a kind of very simple summary of what happens for most assignments. When you're happy with all of that, you scroll right down to the bottom and then click the Save and Return to Course button. And again, after a couple of seconds, it will load. I'll switch the editing back off, and you can see the one that we've just created. So it's actually the third one of those assignments. So we've got workshop assignment, 3,000 word essay. You as a lecturer, if you can now click on that link, you can go in there. You can see a sort of summary of some of the details. So obviously nobody's submitted any work at the moment. If you wanted to see all the submissions all in one go, you click on the view all submissions. I've only got one dummy student in here, but you'd see a list of all the students there, and this is where you could pick up or see all your student submissions. Okay, so that's it really in terms of setting it up from the lecturer's perspective. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to come out of Moodle. So I'm actually logged in myself as a lecturer. So I'm going to log out and then log back in as a student, just to show you what it looks like from a student perspective. Okay, so it'll just, it's loaded fairly quickly there. So I'll go back to where we were before. So it's back into the space that we created. I won't go back into the one that we created before. I'm going to go back into this one here called Turnitin Assignment. The reason being is that I've actually submitted a piece of work here, so I wanted to show you what it looks like, as I say, from the student's perspective. So if I click on here, I'll click on the link. This particular student, what they've done is they've uploaded uploaded an assignment. It's telling them what the submission status is. So at the moment, in this top part of the box, it's telling the student its status is a draft. So the student submitted it as a draft copy. They haven't fully sent it in to be marked. If you scroll further down the page, you'll see that actually you can see that it's a Turnitin assignment, and it's giving the student the similarity score, which in this case is 100%, which is why it's flagged up as red. In other words, it's showing we've got a 100% match. So what the student can do is they can go in here, they can click on this link, and it will give them a similarity score, and it will show you where the matches are. So it's because I've uploaded this piece of work a couple of times. If a student though wants to actually resubmit their work, then they've got the option to edit and upload any submission. So to do that, they click on the blue button here. This is their original submission here that they submitted, but as you can see, they have got the option to add another piece of work. They can delete this assignment here, or they can save the change and go ahead and save the changes, or just cancel it if they're happy. So that's how they submit their edited piece of work. Once they're happy with any changes they've made, then they can move on to actually hand in their piece of work. So this is what I was talking about when I was talking about the settings from the lecturer's perspective. It's a two-stage process for the students. The first stage is to hand in a draft, and then when they're happy with their draft, then they send it in as a completed piece of work. It does tell the student this: once the assignment is submitted, you will not be able to make any more changes. So the student would click in, hand in my submission. They have to certify that the work is their own piece of work, and then they click the continue button. Once they do that, you can see now the work is the status has changed and it's been submitted for grading. So it is fairly clear to the student, although one issue that does arise, or does happen occasionally, is that students don't read those instructions properly and do make mistakes sometimes. Anyway, let me come back out now. So I'm just going to log back out now of being a student and log back in as myself. Okay, I'm going to minimize the screen now. So just for a couple of seconds, you'll see the you'll see the screen change. Okay, I've gone back in now to have a look at the conversation. So okay, I can see from the conversation there's been a number of points that have come in. Okay, I can see that we've got a file size issue in relation to Turnitin, 40 megabytes. Again, in my experience, most assignments are going to be well within that file limit. Students can be shown how to compress the size of their documents if they need to, but it's only probably going to be much larger dissertations that are really going to start exceeding that size. Okay, yeah, that's a good point as well. The from Nicola there, as I can see that the help desk. I'll bring up the details about the digital skills area as well in terms of the support in a few minutes as well. Okay. In terms of the student, I can see there's a little bit a few questions about reverting the student's submission to draft. So when a student sometimes, I mean, they do actually upload their assignment as a completed piece of work by mistake, the lecturer can go back in and revert that piece of work to a draft. So if I go back into the area that I was before, so I'll go back into the Turnitin assignment, and I'm back in now as a lecturer. This is the area where you can see the student had submitted their work for grading. So it's actually a dummy student here, but as a lecturer I can see it's submitted for grading. Now maybe the student had actually submitted this work by mistake, and they weren't happy for it to actually be marked. But as a lecturer you can change the status of this document. So you can do that by going to the column mentioned edit, and then below that, if you click on where it says edit with a little down arrow, you get an option to revert the submission to draft. So if I click on there, can you see now that it's actually gone to a draft status again? So what that will enable the student to do is they will be able to go back and resubmit their piece of work. Again, resubmit it as a draft, or actually resubmit it as a final submission. So that's relatively easy for the lecturer to do. So they can do it individually there, or I think actually on the drop down, if you need to do it for more than one student or even for the whole class, you can go select there, select the student, and you've got quite a few students underneath there. You can tick those boxes there and then revert student submissions to draft status there as well. So there's two ways of doing it within that area as well. Okay, all right, I've gone back to the submissions there. Okay, right, so I think Mark's come back on Gilberto's point about that's not necessarily being something you have to do anymore, which is good. It looks like we've had most of the questions coming in there. I'll leave that conversation still up. Let me go back. Okay, thanks Mark, thanks for the questions. Let me go back now to a few slides. So just going to go back. Okay, so again, you should be able to see the slides come up in front of you now. So in terms of further help or support, in terms of setting up assignments, everything that I've taught through today, including all the settings, including where to go to pick up the assignments, there are some paper guides, so guides that you can go into and actually print off and follow. So if you go to the front page of Moodle, underneath on the left hand side you'll see VLE help, and you'll see a little link which says how to guide for VLE. If you click on there, that will take you into a whole area of lots of resources in terms of videos, or in terms of any guides that you might need. So that's one good place to go to. As I've said before, and I think it was a point that Nicola raised, and this is quite new, that's only just been set up, the Digital Skills Centre, which is on the ground floor in the Learning Resources Centre, they now have a drop-in session for staff, and it alternates between 1 week Moodle, 1 week Office 2016. So actually the first one starting this afternoon, this is weekly from 2:30 to 5:30. You can go in and get one-to-one help, and even if you've set up your assignment and you just like maybe someone to double check it, make sure the settings are fine, then that's one place you can go. So hopefully you can see those instructions there. If you do get a technical issue as well, one other place that you can go to is log an issue with the IT help desk. So there's help desk at lsbu.ac.uk. In terms of the future, I mean, we've been quite specific in terms of what we're doing today. So, for example, we've just been looking at settings, but the next webinar will be looking at approaches to providing electronic feedback. So there we'll be looking at, for example, I mentioned the rubrics, how to set up a rubric as part of the assignment. We'll be looking at future ones in terms of setting up group assignments in Moodle. Another one will be on anonymous marking in Moodle, and the last two that are scheduled at the moment is a kind of site check, so what you need to put into a Moodle module, and then finally getting your Moodle module ready for next semester. Okay, all right, I'll leave this final screen up, and I'll leave the webinar open for the next 5 or 10 minutes. But if you've got any questions, anything that comes into your head, you can either put those into the conversation chat room on the left-hand side, or you can directly email me, Chris Rowell. So my email address is rowlc@lsbu.ac.uk. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you. Bye.